Hey guys, it's Sam, and these are my favorite books of 2023. I know I do this later than like everyone else, but I always read a book that becomes a favorite in December. And I think I read 2 this year. It's just what happens. That's why I wait. But I have 12 books on this list, so let's get into it. These are actually in no particular order, but I will tell you the one that I think is my top favorite of the year, but otherwise these are mostly just in the order I read them. First we have Locklands by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the final book in the Foundryside series. I think there's actually a different name for it, but I just always call it the Foundryside series. And I've been talking about this a lot in different videos lately for end of the year videos and things, but this was one of the best finales that I've read in a very long time. This is one of the best series that I've read in a long time. This is one of my favorite books that I read this year. And it was the first book that I read in 2023. So that's probably why you've heard about it a lot more than anything else. It's sapphic. It has a little bit of like found family elements in the series overall. There are sentient objects. There's some religious trauma stuff for the religious trauma girlies. The world, especially in this final book, is essentially a combination. I mean, it does it in the first book too, but it's taking what would be tech and making it into like magic and fantasy elements. Like almost like computer tech, right? It's very cool. So I really enjoyed this. I can't wait to see what he comes up with next. He's like solidified as a favorite author for me. Next is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This is a little dark academia book that a lot of people talked about when it came out. I think people like were reading it in 2021 and 2022 for sure. This is a little dark, a little twisty. It's following, I think it's 5 friends at a liberal arts school, a small liberal arts school that is basically like a Shakespearean school. And they are in their junior year. They are doing these Shakespearean tragedies, and life starts imitating art. And all the dynamics, and all the things. So, very intense. Look up the triggers in here. There's a lot of triggers that I can't remember because I read it like back in February. But I think I did a full review for this, so I'll link that on the screen as well. This was very good. I should dip into more dark academia than I do. Sometimes I forget. But then books like this come around and I'm like, that's right. Then The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. I can't believe how much I loved this because I'm not really like a John Green girly. This was so good that I was reading it and I was listening to it on audio actually, which I highly recommend because John Green, the author, narrates it. I just think it adds like an additional element to it. I like immediately called my dad and was like, you have to read this. This is John Green essentially reviewing and giving star ratings to different things that are part of our lives. Like, I remember one being Canadian Geese that got a low rating. Halley's Comet, Our Capacity for Wonder, Diet Dr. Pepper, I think of that chapter a lot. Air conditioning, staff, like Penguins of Madagascar, a Piggly Wiggly, like little things, and he will also connect them to other chapters, like the chapter on geese connected to something else somehow, and it all wraps together. It's so well done, so good, and it just makes you go like, It gives you a sense of hope while also not being overly sickly sweet or twee or anything. It's very much like based in reality, but it's like, hey, it can be a yes and versus an either or. Really enjoyed this. And The Adventures of Amina El-Sarafi, shocking no one. Shannon Chakraborty is perfect, and everything she writes is amazing for me. So this is following a murder mommy, famous pirate, who gets roped into piracy yet again. And we get the story of like what happened in her past, what's happening currently, all of that. So good. And just like the way that it's told is part sort of swashbuckling adventure, part slice of life-y, and like the ways in which she's gotten pulled into stuff. And like also points out her faults and things, like the things that she is like, yeah, that's stupid, I do that. Like, she loves a hot guy, right? That's one of her weaknesses, they're hot men. And she's like, yeah, that has gotten me in trouble a time or two. She's great, I love it. Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. I think this is my number 2 favorite book of the year. And I read it in the same month as my number 1. But this, it is dark fairy tale, epic quest, of a woman who is the 3rd sister in a family and is trying to save her sister from an abusive prince who already killed her first sister. So she teams up with a grave witch who has a chicken possessed by a demon, and a reluctant fairy godmother, and a knight that something happened in his past, and so he's a little broken. And they have to get all these elements together, and like it's a quest, but also not. And they have their little found family. And the way that the magic is like, so, she has a bone dog. Just the tasks are impossible and yet she does them, and there's a little bit of element of like power of friendship. It's so good. And Mara, the character in here, is like one of my favorites. Very rarely these days do characters truly, truly stand out for me. I think that's just because of like how many books that I've read, and so things just like aren't sticking in the way that they used to. Mara and everyone in here is like in my heart, you know, in my heart of hearts. I love them. Then, favorite book of the year, Thistlefoot by Jenna Rose Nethercott. It's so good. This is one of those that's like just so completely for me. Adult fantasy, takes place in basically our world, but there is magic. Houses can be sentient. It is just like a known thing. Follows two characters who are estranged siblings, and they're descendants of Baba Yaga, like the Baba Yaga famed witch and mythology figure. And they are from a family that used to be traveling puppeteers, and something happened and they kind of all split up. Baba Yaga ends up gifting them her house in her inheritance, like after she has died. And so they now have the house on Chicken Legs, the famous Baba Yaga house. And they're taking it on a tour around the country and doing this puppet thing again. And that's resurfacing a bunch of magic and a bunch of trauma stuff. And also this villain that is the embodiment of essentially xenophobia is chasing them. We also have chapters from the Sentient House, and it's all also connected to history and predominantly Jewish history and folklore. It's so good. It has everything. And it's one of those books that it's just like even hard to talk about because like thematically resonant. Beautiful writing. I've been looking for if this author is doing more books, and she just has a short story collection coming out, which feels like not enough to me. I want another novel. But I will wait. Yeah, and I just feel like this book is not getting enough attention for how great it is. So, everybody read it. Another book that is one of my favorites that I'm pretty sure I read that same month as those other two, so I think it was October. Really good reading month for me. Starling House by Alex C. Harrow. This is Gothic, horror-adjacent fantasy. Follows a character in a small town who is obsessed with Starling House, which is this kind of abandoned, but maybe someone lives there, house. Ends up getting roped kind of into working there. And so we also get the caretaker of the house's perspective, a man that's lived there for a while. And the house is sentient. Sentient house themes, okay, have been a thing for me. And the story is tied into power dynamics and class struggles and racism within this small town, and the ways in which those things have personified into monsters, and the way that that connects to Starling House. It's so good. Alex C. Harrow is so hit and mystery, but when she does these, like this and Once and Future Witches, which I read last year and was one of my favorites, knock it out of the park for me. And then some of other books just like fall flat. These are great. There's also like two very normal people, a slowly budding romance situation with this. Like, it's very good. It's very good for spooky season. It's very good all the time. Then another book made for me, For the Wolf by Hannah Whitten. We all knew I was going to like this. In this particular bloodline, the first daughter is going to be crowned like the queen. The second daughter is always for the wolf because the wolf lives in the woods, the wolf, right, capitalized, and holds back the monsters they think that are part of the woods, you know, sentient woods. So we follow our main character, Red, who ends up being sort of like sacrificed to the wolf, and then she gets into the forest and discovers that there's more to the story than she knew. She also has some kind of like connection to the forest, and like now she is getting roped into like what's going on with the forest. Also, we get POV chapters from her sister, the one that's for the throne, who is getting pulled into some like very dark, bad stuff happening in the like capital kingdom side of things. So the second book is more about that sister. This was great. I love a sentient woods. Always, always, always and forever. Very dark, very twisty. Nature magic. Again, not quite enemies, but like reluctant allies to lovers kind of thing. People being one with the forest. It's everything. Then, one I read in December, so again, why I don't do these lists until the end of the year, Kaikai by Vaishnavi Patel. This is in the same vein as like Madeline Miller's Circe, but for the Ramayana, I'm following Kaikai, who's one of the antagonists or villains within that story. So it's fleshing out her story, pulling from a lot of different translations of that myth while also adding some new things in and like pulling it together. It is so good. This is what I want out of these retellings. I know that the retellings have had like a huge boom lately. Some of them I think are very bland and add nothing. This adds a ton. So this is up there now with like Circe and The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek, and like some of those that are like top notch. So I love this. I didn't know anything about the Ramayana. I mean, I know like a little bit, but I didn't really know anything going in. Still resonated, like the story is so good, and just like her and what she tries to do, and the ways in which the storyteller is the one who decides who the hero and who the villain is and everything. Just add some depth and dimension, which I love to these kinds of myth characters. And we have The Golden Enclaves by Naomi Novik. This is more just like encapsulating the entire series, but this is the finale for the Skull Man series. I'm pretty sure I read both books, 2 and 3, this year. I think this conclusion, though, is really solid. It ties everything together. It like expands, because we're not just in the school this time. The first 2 books were all taking place in the school. The last book has stuff like in the school and out of the school, but still involves the school and like the greater magical world. The character arcs that these characters go through is really good, and just like I love sort of the grumpy sunshine relationship dynamic, like the very high stakes, and all of that happen in here. So I really dug this. Then we have Some Desperate Glory by Emily Tesh. I read like 3 of my favorite books in December. This is taking place in the far future where Earth has been destroyed by aliens, but it's kind of like all aliens versus humans a little bit. But humans are mostly scattered around the universe now and are like a much smaller amount. And our main character lives on a space station that is very militarized and are basically training humans to like kill aliens, essentially. She is one of the best students on that space station, and she surprisingly somehow gets assigned to nursery, which is just like making babies, instead of any of the military factions that she's like thinking she's going to go into. And then her twin brother ends up getting assigned to like almost a suicide mission route, which also he's a really powerful warrior. So she's like, what is going on? So she flees to try to figure that out. In the mix of all of that, comes into contact with an alien of that race that kind of wiped out humans, not completely wiped them out, but, you know, like killed Earth. And there ends up being some like timey-wimey parallel universe stuff, which I did not know when I got into this, but I'm telling you because I think it's important. It was very cool, very unexpected, fast-paced, but also some like emotional beats to it. It kind of shows how someone would handle deconstructing propaganda, getting to see how different things would have impacted your life, different choices would have impacted your life and other people's lives. It's also queer. It's very good. So yeah, I highly enjoyed this, and it's a standalone, which is great. And finally, the last of my favorites for the year, also a book I read in December, Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in the Live Ship Trader series, and I'm sure you know about it because everybody knows about Robin Hobb, it seems like these days, but this was great. It's chunky, and there are parts that I would never call it slow, but her books are always in-depth character studies in addition to really interesting worlds and like different dynamics and everything. There's multiple POVs, and even the characters that you don't like, especially if they're POV characters, it's like eventually like you learn enough to be like interested. Like one of my favorite POVs in here is one of the villains. Very excited that I finally got into the series after so long, and I plan to return to it and all of that. But of course, Robin Hobb is going to make the list for favorites because the books are great. She's a great writer. It's, ooh, you hurt because she is one of the only authors that is able to still give you hope that things will work out for the characters, but also you know it's going to be a long and arduous road, and it's going to not work out a lot of times for them. So, yeah, it's tough, but it's worth it. So those are my 12 favorite books of this year. Comment down below, let me know what some of your favorite books were from 2023. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.